I'd like to introduce him. Chris has over 20 years' experience in the global mobility field and currently runs a consulting firm providing strategic global mobility advisory and coaching services. He has advised multiple organizations of all sizes on group moves. Additionally, Chris is the founder of the Swiss SMI Mobility Network. So now I'll hand it over.
Many thanks, Lily. And let's start off with failing to plan is planning to fail. So talking about some key success factors of group moves, but to give you an overview, what I'll talk about, the objective of today is basically to give you a thorough understanding of group moves, because group moves is some type of a beast that's sometimes underestimated. And at the end of this presentation, looking at the characteristics of a move, the risks and challenges that come with those moves, and finally the key success factors, I hope you will agree with me that it's not business as usual when a group move is happening. So from the objective of the day to the message of the day, and that's also the title, failing to plan is planning to fail. And I have accompanied and advised in the past 15 years, at least 30, if not more companies in group moves of different sizes. I mean, different sizes, give you an idea, somewhere like 10 people and others were like 400 people. And when I talk people, I mean, of course, people and their families. So different sizes, different industries, different destinations where the moves were happening. And one thing became clear and was a learning for me and also all the clients who worked with me was that failing to plan is planning to fail. Seldomly so true, this saying, than in the case of group moves. Now, what are the characteristics of group moves? I mean, we have the permanent move characteristics. I'll talk about that. We have the attractiveness that is important of the package and of course also of the destination. Communication plays a huge role given the group dynamics effects that are there. And last but not least, change management and governance. Let's come to the permanent move characteristics. Well, it's actually really a one-way permanent move that you're offering to people when you do a group relocation. While on an assignment, which a lot of people are familiar with in mobility, of course, you have someone who goes for a period of time abroad and will return. In this case, that's not the case, of course, because you have not an assignee moving, but you have actually the job, the position that is moving when a company decides to move a group on a permanent basis into another jurisdiction. So the choice of an employee and the psychological contract behind it is a very different one. You have to imagine there is a well, take it or leave it attitude towards that. I mean, if there's an assignee who doesn't want to take up an assignment, all right, he will be an employee. But if the position moves in a group move, you have the choice to go along or to become redundant. So a very difficult situation from a psychological perspective, because people definitely have to make real lifetime decisions. It's a one-way move without a return ticket. And an assignment is always like not really a lifetime decision. For some people, it might feel like that, but it's not permanent. Keeping that in mind, the destination attractiveness, of course, plays also a role. And I mean, talent availability nowadays is a big topic. There's a recent survey from Korn & Ferry, which predicts actually a shortage, a talent shortage for highly skilled people in the coming years. And we see that already in markets like in the US, where you have almost full employment, where this is a key factor for a location choice. And so that can be one of the criteria. Labor law was often cited when I was involved in helping to make decisions for a destination, where to move, quality of life, culture. And if you look at some various factors here, the schooling availability, just to show you that in a little bit more detail. I mean, people will not be willing to move if they cannot put their children into suitable schools. So it's an absolute hygiene factor that you have international schools that can take up also larger groups of children who might move along. And also work permits obviously play a role depending on of what nationalities your population that you move consists. That might also play a role if those are available. Besides destination attractiveness, there's also the general attractiveness, of course, of the relocation package. And so you will typically put the people on a local and a competitive local salary package. In addition to that, there will be a benefit package, which is also likely very much benchmarked. In some cases, of course, there's a difference. You might move people into an already existing organization, which facilitates, of course, all those things like there is already a payroll existing, there is already the knowledge about things like social security, things like immigration, all that knowledge is already there. But in other cases, you might really move into a green field with a group, so that you have to build up all those systems and learn actually about what it means to do business in that location. Some of the critical relocation benefits, based on my experience, were always the spousal support. As mentioned, it's a lifetime decision that people have to make if they want to go with the offer that a company makes. And it's a lifetime decision, and that tends to be discussed with the spouse, obviously. Schooling, as I mentioned before, we had moves into Switzerland in the past where so many companies came for tax reasons at the time, setting up principal structures in Switzerland, came into the area of the Lake Geneva, and the international schools were just overwhelmed with requests. Some schools were full, and it was really, really difficult to secure schooling places. So that played a major role in some moves, and I've even seen one of the moves which was delayed purposely in order to get the people, to get the children, get their children into school. Home leave is another one, which is one of the transitional ones that at the very beginning, because the people have to burn the bridges, basically, no more home social security, really living in another country for the rest of their career, at least, with that company. So giving them some home leave facilitates actually the farewell from the home location. And if you look at the benefits which are there, they're obviously the one-off benefits, which are benefits that are related to the move, to the relocation, classical relocation benefits, theoretically also some incentivization for the move or some retention tools. There are transitional ones like a home leave or some benefits that will fade out over time. Often I've seen, for example, that housing was initially as a benefit on top of a local salary, and local taxation was paid on top of that for a period of years. Some decided against it. And in some cases, very often I've seen also tax services as a transitional benefit for the first 2 years until the people were actually able to file their own tax returns. And of course, you have the ongoing benefits which are there as a local employee in a new country. Talking about communication needs, group dynamics, I had to learn that the hard way. I was standing in the Netherlands before a group move, and it was like a gathering of all employees, and the CEO made a speech where he announced actually the group relocation. It was the first time that the employees were hearing that. There were 200 people in the room. CEO stood up front and told that the whole trading team of a company there will move to Switzerland. The dynamic in the room was incredible. I mean, the sounds that the people were making when they were confronted with such a decision was incredible. And immediately someone shouted out, "Oh my God, Switzerland, the most expensive country in the world." And that showed me those group dynamics which exist, because you will always have some people which have a negative bias towards moving. They might have reasons why they don't want to move. Two of the reasons that everybody would understand was, in one case, we were supposed to move someone from Paris, and it happened actually that the wife owned 12 pharmacies in Paris, making so much more money than actually the employee of that firm, that he decided against the move. In another case where someone was supposed to be part of a group move out of the UK, it was an executive who actually had, in real, and I've even been shown the pictures, had bought a castle which he renovated over the years. And he also really didn't want to leave his castle to go on a relocation. So there are always reasons, but the bad ones are the ones that, when a whole group is affected, who start talking negatively, who are influencing then the decisions of others. And so it is very, very important in terms of communication, actually, to deliver the message, what a package will be, respectively, what will be the benefits, what will be the terms and conditions of the move, really as soon as possible after the announcement. That has to do with expectation management. And because what we have seen when the package definition was delayed and the announcement was already out, that caused a lot of insecurity for the employees. In many cases, sometimes it's only a group of, say, a headquarter or a division that is about to move, and it's not yet clear who is actually affected for the move and who is not affected. And the longer this time drags out until they get like an offer in front of them, where the expectations are managed, that is a very critical time where often high potentials are looking around to find another job before they are getting before they're getting an offer. And what happens as well, if you don't explain in detail, in a very comprehensive way, what the future location will bring, people will go out on the internet and search themselves. And then comes again this bias into play. If they're not very much in favor of moving, they will find all those negative aspects naturally, instead of actually getting something provided by HR, by mobility, which gives them comprehensive destination information. Just think about the comprehensive. I mean, you do have to explain to an assignee who goes for 3, 4, 5 years, you do have to explain to them, obviously, some of the terms and conditions and how the international health insurance works, how the taxation works, if it's a host-based approach, or how the tax equalization works. But for someone who moves on a permanent basis, I mean, they want to understand how the health insurance works in detail, how the pension system works in detail, what other social security aspects are there. So the need for information and what needs to be communicated is much higher in a group move, which is permanent and one way, than it is for an assignee. So I remember I was talking to some companies about and where they had a group move impending, and I heard this answer from a head of mobility: hey, well, we know how to move people around. We have an assignment program with 500 assignees. Only then later to find out that what is needed for a group move is very, very different. Group dynamics I talked about already a little bit. Now, let me give you something on change management. I mean, you have to see that this is a major change effort. And if you use change management expertise, which you might have in your organization, you very likely will have in your organization, have someone or even a consultant who can help you with a way of change management thinking, that is enormously helpful. And what you also need to think about when it comes to the change that happens during a group move is that it's not only the people are moving. I mean, there might be role changes. There might be there is a need for additional office space. There might be tax considerations which are there, which come with substance requirements, which then drive actually the moving date, respectively, how many people need to be in place in what time. So it's a very multidisciplinary approach where you are engaging with multiple functions in your organization. Another point that I should not forget to mention is governance. And governance means that in some cases, the people who are actually working on the group move, who are defining the packages, those are the same people who are also affected by that move, especially when it's a headquarter move. So it's a governance issue if you set up your own package, so to say, which is why that needs to be communicated very well and discussed in advance, who should sign off on the packages that are built and on the communication which is given. I had two sad stories. I mean, one was from Italy and one was from Germany, a group move some years back, and those were both European headquarters of US multinationals, and the European VPHRs were in charge of that group move. In both cases, they tried to inform headquarters in America about what they were doing, and they were also about to move themselves in this case. And in both cases, the US did not read their mails and the messages when they saw the packages that were designed for an intra-European move. In the end, those two VPs, they got fired over this project, which is a very sad situation, obviously. But just to keep it in mind, I mean, never set up your own salary or something like that. Always make sure that you have a governance process in place when you do a group move. Let's come to the risks and challenges of a group move, and there are some of them. I mean, there's the business disruption, which is probably the biggest ones, and then there are 5 different C's, which we will go through briefly and give you some examples on. The worst one is probably the business disruption, and from experience, I can tell you that the pickup rates that I've seen from relocations that I sometimes observed only, which I did not participate in advising, but also the ones that I advised in, the pickup rate can range between 10% and 95%, meaning that only 10% in one case of the employees targeted for a group move took up the offer. And in this case, it was a classic failure of planning. Planning was, it was a move from Germany to Switzerland, and they simply said, well, no problem, Switzerland has lower taxes than Germany, so we'll simply give them their salaries and the relocation, and that should be fine. That was not fine. It was wrongly communicated, and they had to delay business plans actually to do a group move for 2 years until they made a second attempt with properly planned information, communication, and packages. Now, my experience also tells me that when those group moves are well managed and well prepared and planned, and you have actually also a very short period between the announcement and the offering packages and the talks that you have with the people, then you can get a pickup rate up to 95% that I've seen in the past. There will always be a certain percentage of people, like the UK castle owner or the French guy with his wife and all the pharmacies, who will not be willing to move. But in any case, what you need to do, because it also depends on many other factors, like your current labor market, where you're working in, the skills of the people that you're moving, and also their individual preferences, plus the destination attractiveness, where you end up in terms of percentage. Most companies aim at something between 70 and 80% to keep the business disruption low, but you have to always consider sort of a contingency planning. You should always have like some recruiters in the destination location already on standby, where they have an idea about what skill sets your company needs, what is at risk of needing to be filled as a position, and very much key to avoid business disruption. And business disruption can be horrific depending on the type of business you're in, and it's of course one of the key things that you need to avoid in such a group move. In terms of cost, I mean, I mentioned it already with the benefits. You have the one-off cost, you have a transitional cost, and you have an ongoing cost. So for business planning, we often did like cost projections, which went up into the net present value of 10 years of such a move, which were very detailed, where you tend to have a higher cost in the beginning, which then trails off when people are really local with no more additional benefits after a few years. But one cost is a very important one that you should keep in mind, especially when designing the packages and considering how attractive you need to make such a move. And that is the replacement cost. The replacement cost is someone who is not willing actually to move with his or her position to the new location and therefore becomes redundant. So the replacement cost consists of various aspects. It consists of the redundancy payment that you need to do, depending on the seniority of your people. That can be higher or lower. It also consists of the hiring costs for a new incumbent for that position that is needed. And last but not least, also for the training cost, the virtual training cost that you have until that person can fully replace actually the person who was not willing to move. Now, if you think about that, how high that can be, and it turned out to be sometimes 2 to 4 times of an annual salary, you can consider how much you can basically spend to make actually a move attractive for someone, so that they are willing to pick up the offer. And it can be very interesting. I mean, I've seen one company, they were desperate to move their people, and they gave a large financial incentive, actually, which was half an annual salary, as a bonus to the people to move, because they were expecting that they will have a hard time rehiring in the target country, actually, the talent that they could lose in the process. And that helped them in turn to have a very good pickup rate, which was in the 95% range. One thing which is very helpful for people, and has been used in all the ones that I was relocations that I've been involved, was that you provide them with very detailed side-by-side calculations, so that the employee sees, this is what I was earning what I'm earning currently with all the benefits, and this is what I will be earning after taxes, after Social Security in the other country, together with all the information, what it means to enter a new Social Security system, for example. So much on cost is always an important one, so we have to talk about it. Competence and capacity. I mean, two aspects to this one. Even if you have a large mobility team at your disposal who is moving hundreds of assignees per year, it is a difference if you have to move 30, 50, 100, or let alone hundreds of people at the same time. You will definitely see the limits of your capacity, and this is why planning is so important. If you want to provide offers to, say, 100 people in a very short period of time, because it's a whole group and nobody wants to wait, and one has already his offer and then the next one, you better do that as quick as possible. And so I've seen in many cases that providers were asked actually to support mobility in these times of higher workload, and being able to do that. Another aspect of capacity is you have to think about the capacity of your providers as well in the host locations. Think about destination services providers. I mean, they have to find, in a new city, they have to find homes theoretically for 100 families. So the capacity of that market, they better plan, they better be ready, they better staff up and be warned ahead of time that, well, a whole group of people is coming, which requires their services. And same goes, of course, for a tax provider, who also needs to be aware that at one point in time, a lot of calculations will be needed, and at another point of time, a lot of the entrance interviews will be needed. Going over to confidentiality, the worst thing that can happen, and it happened in two of the moves that I accompanied, was that while internally on a confidential basis, it was discussed to make a move, and that was before the employees were informed, it somehow leaked out, in some cases through a provider, and found its way in the newspapers. Now imagine the mood in your organization if your employees are learning about a plan to be moved as a group, where you don't, at that point of time, don't even know if you belong to it or not, when you learn from the newspaper that your company is doing a group move. That is a communication catastrophe, basically, because you have to catch each and every single one and give them the information, which at the time you might not be ready for it. So be very clear about being very confident, keep it to a small circle, and when you engage providers in getting them ready to support you during the relocation, make it clear to them that they have a non-disclosure agreement and are not talking about it. A side effect that someone told me about is a head of mobility who was in charge of a group move. He told me the moment that it was announced, and then to the employees, and then also found its way into the press, he was bombarded by providers from all sides, recruitment firms, relocation firms, advisory firms. Everybody wanted to support him, in this move, which is a typical one, because that's where money is spent and needs to be spent, no doubt. The compliance aspects, of course, think about the tax support. Typically, tax support is given for the first 2 years after a move, and it's also the need to explain some of the compliance aspects is higher than with assignees. Take, for example, Social Security. I mean, they're not staying in their home Social Security, obviously. They're joining the host Social Security. So they want to understand in depth what it means for them and their family. And same goes also for health insurance. The health insurance system of the target country is, of course, of interest to them. And you have to provide more detail on that. Otherwise, they start searching themselves and you run the risk, which is there, of course, that they find the stuff that they want to find and not what you want to find them. Commuters, let's talk about them separately, because I am not the biggest fan of commuters, also in normal mobility programs. But let me tell you around some of the few points here. I mean, the complexity comes with, for example, a dual taxation very often. And just think of it, if you talk about intra-European moves, and they're now, Europe is facing the Brexit, and that might trigger some group moves. And there is, of course, an EasyJet, which easily flies into, Frankfurt, Paris, and Amsterdam. And so people might like the idea of commuting and leaving their family back home. But therefore, commuters are always a topic in group moves. It's also what you have to consider, that families need to be moved at school starting times. So when you would do a move in December, that's not typically when schools are starting. So you want to move in the summer when that happens. I had a move which was from Germany to Switzerland. And in this move, about 200 people also faced it that for tax reasons, they were moving in January and the families could only come in July in the summer, so that the children could join the school in that year and finish the school year back home. Enormous complexity was there. For example, we had an issue, a compliance issue, that some families where the spouse was not working, which were left back, were actually falling out of the German Social Security, because the commuter had already a contract in Switzerland and simply had the right to commute back. So he was covered under Swiss Social Security, which obviously doesn't cover actually families in Germany. So replacement benefits needed to be put in play for that one. Talking about the cost, especially with this case, so they had a preliminary for like 5 months. They allowed, actually 5-6 months, they allowed the people to commute and leave their families back in Düsseldorf. They made a cost projection for that. They looked at the average flight cost and multiplied that by what it would take, plus the temporary accommodation or whatever accommodation they had. And when they compared actually their cost projection with the actual cost for the commute, it turned out to be 200% over budget, which tells us that the cost of commuters is very, very often underestimated. And when they looked into it a little bit deeper, they found out what the case was. Some people were booking a Friday afternoon flight, and then there was an important meeting, and oh no, they have to change that flight last minute, and they need to take the evening flight, which was booked out in economy, and then I have to go back to my family. So whatsoever, I have to fly back business. That happened several times in that company, and the cost was extremely underestimated. For me, even a stronger reason why commuters should be really kept to a minimum and only be granted on an exceptional basis are cultural aspects. And culture within your organization, just think about it. You might grant, let's say, 2 home leaves in the first year for the majority of your population that you moved, and they work then alongside with someone who has 52 home leaves per year. In terms of a consistent treatment, this is not really what you might want to have in your organization. Last but not least, the shrinking working week. You can't ask your employees actually to fly in on a Sunday and leave on a Saturday morning. They will fly out sometimes already on a Thursday evening. Excuse me, with a nice argument. Flights are cheaper on Thursdays than on Fridays. Sounds good. And then they will work from home, and oops, they work from home, and you have a permanent establishment issue. That's one thing. And last but not least, a soft factor. commuters, especially over a longer period of time, say 2 years or something like that, is actually, you can see it as a company incentivized and supported family separation. And just by my own experience, I've seen many, many commuters where the commute led to the breaking up of their family. And as a company, you have to ask yourself, do you really want to incentivize something like that? I mean, a lot of them, they say, oh, it's great, you know, no problem. And some of them, it might be pleasant not to see their family for the week. I've heard that as well. But nevertheless, consider these 5 aspects here whenever you grant a commute. Now, well, let's finally make that round. I mean, we talked about the characteristics, we talked about the risks which are inherent, and what flows out of all those things is basically these 6 key success factors that, based on my experience, really play a role. So being prepared and being on time with the moment that you make the offer to the employees, if possible, as soon after the announcement of the move as possible. Also consider the non-movers. When the business has identified the people that they want to move, make sure that you also address the non-movers, because they might have some expectations. If it's a headquarter move, I'm not anymore part of the headquarter when I moved. If it's a move out of a headquarter of a certain group, the moving people, they will be wondering, is this the end of their career if they're not anymore in the headquarters? So being prepared on time is important. Multidisciplinary. As I mentioned, whenever I worked in these projects, often they were tax-driven. In some cases, they were driven by other considerations, by cost considerations, NLs and labor law considerations, where people wanted to exit like a jurisdiction with a very, very employee-friendly labor law. It was always a multidisciplinary approach. The worst thing that can happen, another failure that I've seen, that I've heard about, was a move from the Netherlands into France of an organization. And when the people reached, they did not even have offices and desks and laptops to work with. So there was a business disruption of up to 2 months until they actually could start with the work. So very bad planning, very bad coordination between moving dates and the availability actually also of the necessary office space. Think about that, think out of the silo, and engage as mobility and HR, engage with the other players in the organization. And being on time, back to the first one, also means you get yourself involved in the discussions about a potential group relocation as early as possible. Expectation management. I mean, you have to be very, very transparent and clear and set the expectations, because only that will allow actually your employees to make a real good informed decision, which, as I mentioned previously, is a lifetime decision if they want to go on a group move for the rest, which is not only for a couple of years, but permanent. Change management. This is a massive change, and people will really have a lot of questions around that. So think all those change management aspects which are there. If you can get help for change management, use it. If you have any resources in your organization, help with the communication can come from change management. I've seen companies which had set up extensive FAQs and the larger moves, even hotlines where people could ask questions and get personal consultations to make it a real good employee experience that shows actually that they are valued. Governance, point 5. If you happen to move yourself in the process, be sure to have a governance system set up somehow to not come into the target there. One interesting aspect I want to share with you is that while I was at my time at EY, when I was in charge of the group relocations in EMEA, and I was always involved a little bit later than the tax people were talking actually to companies. They were always on the forefront, or some of the other advisory guys. The moment that HR came into play, it turned out that a lot of organizations in the process, they realized that moving the people is basically even more important than the tax savings that you do, because you cannot realize them or the other benefits other than tax savings that you promise yourself from the move. Where that they said that it's really more important that we can manage to move our people. So with that message, I mean, let me end on another important message. It's a wonderful opportunity for mobility to attain that strategic relevance in an organization. Obviously, only when you're getting it right. But to get it right, don't fail to plan. Many thanks. I think we can now spend some minutes on questions, if there are any.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for that and some really, really good insights into the success factors of group moves. So I've got a few questions that have come in. Firstly, are lump sums commonly used for group relocation?
Lump sums I have seen in terms of financial incentivization, but lump sums which actually lowering the administrative burden of the mobility team should not really be used in group moves because of the psychological contract, which is a very delicate one. It's a permanent move. So you better give the people actually the support that they need for home search, for other aspects, for the destination services, etc. So I would advise against that. And I can tell you, I have seen group moves which were done out of Russia, where the people were simply, they threw some 30,000 euros at them and said, organize your own move and do that. And I've spoken to some people who went through that, and they had massive problems in the new location, actually, even with the money they had. If they were willing to spend it, some of them saved it and made wrong decisions. It's not really worth it. And last but not least, lump sums also have this risk of this duty of care risk, that a purchasing decision that went wrong could fall back actually on the company. Any other questions?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, we've had a few more come in. Should an ideal group move have a repatriation plan as well?
I have not seen that. I worked with one organization which had very mobile employees in any case. So they had a very interesting structure. They sent actually the whole batch of their group first on their assignment policy as assignees, then with a decision that they should make after year 2, if they will localize after year 3, or if they will be moved on after year 3. And that said, only move on, but not back. And since you're moving as an organization, you're moving actually positions, it's very hard to promise a repatriation because you will not know if you will still have business in the country of origin.
Great, thank you. And I think we've got time for one more. So what about talent management aspects when moving a group out of the headquarters?
Absolutely key, and they are also one of the groups that mobility has to interact with, because people will go into a new structure, which will mean that their reporting lines might change, which will mean also that their career opportunities that they see might change. And you have to inform them about these aspects so that they can make like an informed decision. And talent management is also plays a key role actually in identifying who is moving and who should stay back. So a cooperation with talent management is very important, and the clarity that the people will want about what their career will mean in the new organization in another country is of utmost importance for the communication.
That's great, Chris. Thank you. And I'd actually just like to thank you on behalf of everyone on the call today.